Michael Wehner needs no introduction, so I'm not giving him one.
That's fine. So the Nobel Prize is probably is the most important scientific prize. I'm a scientist, and I actually have met people that have won the Nobel Prize. Generally pretty interesting people. But I want to talk about, not so much about the people winning it, but the medal itself, and particularly the guy that designed the one you see in the background there, Erik Lindberg. So let's talk about Nobel first. He is probably famous. Most people probably know this, that he invented the blasting cap and then later on dynamite, and became very rich because of all this. Now, so he's a very rich guy. His brother died quite a few years earlier than he did, and the French newspapers got him mixed up with himself, with Alfred, and they condemned him as a war profiteer. Now, I don't think Nobel actually thought of explosives, that way. He was, interested in using explosives to build things and that kind of stuff. But it was certainly, weapons were made out of this stuff. And so this apparently caused him to think about, how he would be remembered. And so he set up in his will what became the Nobel Prize by selling his shares in the company that he started, called Nitroglycerin, something in Swedish. Now, the medalist is a guy named Erik Lindberg, and he's an interesting guy. His father was an artist and sculptor, and basically trained him, and he went to some of the Swedish academies. He really was a prolific medalist. He made lots and lots of them, and I'll show you some of the ones that aren't Nobel related towards the end. But of course, he's most well known for the Nobel Prize. And I only learned yesterday that he designed the 1912 Stockholm Olympic medals, and there is a participant medal on eBay right now that I'm thinking about. There's a connection to San Francisco in that he received a gold medal at the 1915 Pan-Pacific International Exposition, which is interesting. Presumably, in the art exhibits that were at the Palace of Fine Arts. No, I think, I'm attracted to these medals because I find them very interesting. I think they're very well done artistically. And I think part of that is because in 1901 and 1902, he got a scholarship to study in Paris. And the Wikipedia says he's influenced by these four French medalists, Roti and Chaplin and Vernon, and then Tacit. I don't have any of Tacit's medals, but I have medals of the others, and I can see it. His style may be closer to the Tacit medals that I've seen online, although I think he does a better job at capturing likenesses in my view. And also in my view, his medals are not Art Deco by any means, but they're really kind of post Art Nouveau. Roti and Chaplin and Vernon are considered Art Nouveau, are often described as Art Nouveau French medalists, although that term is a little perhaps misleading when you think about Art Nouveau posters and paintings and things. But anyway, that's sort of how I view his work. Now, when describing the Nobel Prizes, it's important to understand that they're not all awarded by the same folks. In fact, the Peace Prize isn't awarded by the Swedes at all. It's by a Norwegian committee, a special committee, and that's actually in Oslo. And when I was actually in Oslo once, and they have a little museum and talk about the Peace Prize there. And the other medals, the technical medals, are all Swedish. Physics and chemistry are separate medals. Those are decided by panels set up by the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. And physiology or medicine is actually one prize, and that's done at the Karolinska Institute, which is some kind of medical research facility. And literature is the something called the Swedish Academy, which I don't really quite know what that is. And then economics is also the Royal Swedish Academy of Science. And economics actually isn't really a Nobel Prize, although it's certainly called that, and we'll get into that a little later on. So let's go right to the big one, the Peace Prize. And this one is the one I lead off with because it is the medal that is just recently sold. It was for a lot of money. You can see that it's kind of an interesting medal. It has a sort of a texture to it. I've never actually seen one. And that particular one was given to this guy, Dmitry Muratov, who was a journalist in Russia. And he was awarded it because he wrote extensively about and criticized Russia for their annexation of the Crimea and their excessive use of military force, both within and outside the country. Now, this obviously made him pretty unpopular, and he had to leave. But last year, he decided he would sell his prize, and it was to benefit the UNICEF's humanitarian efforts for Ukrainian children displaced by the current war. And I think, to everybody's surprise, it was sold by Heritage without commission for $103.5 million, which makes this by far the most expensive numismatic item of any kind. It's an astonishing amount of money. Obviously, it's a donation as well, an astonishing donation. So the prize itself was not designed by Erik Lindberg. It was designed by a Norwegian sculptor because it is a Norwegian medal, a guy named Gustav Vigeland, and in 1902 when the Nobel Prizes started. And I said he was assisted by Erik Lindberg, and that's because Lindberg cut the dies from Vigeland's model. And the reverse shows three men embracing, and this is supposed to be a symbol of international fraternization, which is supposed to be, people getting along, and so we have peace. And in Latin, I won't read the Latin because I can't do that. It says for peace and fraternity among peoples. That's on the reverse. And on the front, it has details about Nobel's birth and death. And on the edge, it's engraved with Nobel Peace Prize and the year and the name of the person who won it. Now, in 1902, they were 23 carats of gold and weighed 192 grams. They were 66 millimeters across. In 1981, they kept the size and everything, but they changed it to 18 karat gold. And I read it was 18 karat recycled gold, whatever that means. And that weight is wrong. I probably have these backwards. It's 5 millimeters thick. And some other peace prizes have sold at auction. The 1936 one was awarded to an Argentinian. It was the first peace prize given to a South American. This particular medal sold for over $1 million, and it has a chop mark in it because it was scheduled to be melted. And I guess the guy who received it to send it to the smelter decided that, well, it actually was real and maybe worth more than melt value. Which apparently it was. So let's go on to the other the discipline medals, and we'll start with literature. This one was awarded in 1959 to Salvatore Quasimodo, who I think, well, I don't know where he's from, but the pictures that I've taken of these, now obviously I guess I saw one prize once in the Lawrence Hall of Science. I think they have his, but generally these are not things that you see very often. And so the pictures are all taken from auction houses, and not many of the literature prizes have been sold. It took me a long time to find this one. And you can see it's got Nobel on the obverse with birth and date in Latin and Roman numerals. And then on the back, we'll talk about this at the next one. On the back is a young man sitting under a laurel tree who, enchanted, listens to and writes down the Song of the Muse. And in Latin, and this is the same on all of these prizes that look like this, it says it is beneficial to improve life through discovered arts. And that's kind of important, and we'll get to that later. This line is adapted from Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid. And as you can see, I wrote that it was 1902 when it was designed by Lindberg. And on these medals, the awardee's name is actually on the reverse rather than on the edge. And next to that, it has these letters, which are Swedish for the Swedish Academy. And this particular one sold for a lot less. It was 125,000 euros. I wasn't able to find any literature prizes that were sold by American auction houses. In fact, this is the only one that I was able to find. Now, physics and chemistry are separate prizes, but the medals are exactly the same. Same obverse as the literature, but different allegorical figures, and the Latin is the same, at least around the top of the back of the medal. What this one is, nature, who's represented as Isis. That's the one standing on the left. We're looking at it here, and she's emerging from the clouds and holding in her arms a cornucopia, which presumably has knowledge in it, and this veil on her face is lifted by the genius of science, which I think is kind of cool, actually. And the underneath is the Latin for the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. And you can see a couple of these have sold, for a couple 100,000. There are probably more of these that have sold, partly because they're both physics and chemistry, I suppose. The guy Bohr is not Niels Bohr, the famous one. It's Niels Bohr's son, actually. This is the medicine or physiology prize. And this is one prize. It's either a medicine or a physiologist. This one is one of the more famous pieces. It was Francis Crick in 1962, who with Watson discovered the DNA helical structure. And again, it's the same Latin on the top and a different allegorical figure. This time it's the genius of medicine, and she's reading a book and collecting water, pouring out a rock in order to quench a sick girl's thirst. And so, that's helping your health, I guess. And this one, the Latin says the Karolinska Institute. And Crick's, because the DNA helix is such an important scientific discovery, his medal sold for over $2 million. Again, a fairly hefty amount of money out of my budget. In fact, the other one for a guy named Roos, who I have no idea what he did, still was out of my budget. Okay, so economics. And I have to move something so I can read this to you. It's the Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel. So Nobel didn't set up a prize for economics, but this bank bankrolled it, and so to speak, in 1968. So Lindberg was dead by then, and so obviously he couldn't have designed this medal. And I don't know if the texture is meant to look like the Peace Prize or not, but anyway, that's what it looks like. And so this one was designed by a Swedish female artist, Gunvar Svensson Lundqvist, in '68, and this doesn't have Latin on it. This is actually in Swedish, so it's the Sveriges Riksbank in memory of Alfred Nobel. So it's not the Nobel Prize; it's in his memory. And these lower stuff below Nobel's portrait are supposed to mean, you're getting rich because it's horns of plenty. And on the back is the emblem of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences and the name in Swedish. And this one, like the Peace Prize, the awardee name is on the edge. This one, particular example, it was hard to find these as well. And it sold for $1.5 million. And I guess, some rich banker must have wanted it or something. There are some controversies around this. I mean, economics is often called the dismal science. And that may be being generous. The one that I'm familiar with is a guy named Nordhaus, and the reason being is Nordhaus tried to put a cost on climate change, and it's it's way too low. In fact, my own research suggests that it's way too low, and I think that that it's somewhat controversial. But I think most economists who actually understand anything about climate change think it's a lot more expensive than what the Nordhaus estimates are. But being, a scientific and a political and an economic issue all at once, these kind of things get controversial, I guess is a light way of saying it. So it's unlikely I'm going to win one, but I do have 2 degrees of separation. I'll talk about that at the end. And obviously I'm not going to afford one either. So the question is, what is collectible in this area? And there are some things that are collectible. This first one isn't one of them. In 1902, the first year, they actually made some in bronze. Now it's not clear how many they did. This is the science one, the physics and chemistry one, I'm sorry, with Isis and the girl lifting the veil. And it's in bronze, same size and everything else, but only the 1 year. So it's probably super rare. And this one sold in 2021 for $13,000. So again, kind of out of my budget there. And I thought this was the only one, but then yesterday I found another one of these. This is the medicine physiology one, with medicine slaking the thirst of the ill girl. And this one was a bargain. Presumably they made the same number of these, and the European version of Heritage in 2017 sold it for 445 euros. And so the guy that won this one just, hit the bank, because, presumably if he put this in the stack sale like that other one, he'd get, 10 times his money or something, or more. But still, they're so rare that, you have to really be lucky to score one of those. But there are some others. And this is a real series that's collectible, and I'll show you some from my collection. The Panelist, remember I talked about all these different panels, they receive a miniature Nobel Prize medal. It's only 27 millimeters, so it's about the size of a quarter. And these are the different prizes. Medicine seems to be the most common of these. Physics and chemistry is less common, but it's out there. And economics seems to be the least common. I've never seen one for the literature and as well as peace. And I don't know if they don't give them for those, or if they just, the people that get them hold on to them and never put them out for sale. They do come in silver, in gold-plated silver or gilt, and then in gold itself. And I can't remember if I wrote this down, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I had read somewhere that if you were on it 10 years in a row and you could turn your silver ones in and get a gold one. I don't know if that's really true. And if it is, it doesn't really explain the gold-plated silver one. So it's not, why the different, how these are actually used is still a mystery to me. But here's the one for medicine and physiology. This is a gilt one for my collection, and here it is in silver, kind of a beat up one. And what this says is something else in Latin, which translates as "they who bettered life on earth by their newly found mastery." And it does some kind of medical thing, a basin and Aeschylus staff with a serpent around it and a wreath behind that. Here's the wreath and a bowl of water. And a common obverse to the real prizes. It's the same as the actual prizes. Of course, a lot smaller. Here's the physics and chemistry one. It's not as really specific. This is a gilt silver one, and this is just silver, but it's sort of dark from tarnish, but otherwise in good condition. And this one is simply the Swedish coat of arms, and which includes this little North Star, and then the Latin for Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. Now, these medals, like this one that's in a slab, they have a date associated with it. and there is stuff printed on the side, including a code like Y15 or something. And the slabbing companies know how to interpret that, but I have not figured that out yet. And I don't know where that, like I said, a lot of the details of this are unknown. I guess I'm gonna have to meet somebody who's on one of these committees someday to ask them. Okay, so there we go. And then here's the economic one. And this actually is an exact copy of the actual Nobel Prize, just 27 millimeters and doesn't have your name on the side. So they're coated on the edge, but I don't know. And this thing that 10 silvers for 1 gold. Yeah, I don't know if that's really true. I mean, that was an auction house said that, and they make up sort of stuff all the time. So I don't know. And in fact, if that were the case, you'd think there'd be a lot more silver ones than gilt ones or than gold ones, and that doesn't seem to be the case. The gold ones sell for a lot more, which is why I don't have one. So other collectible Nobel Lindberg medals. This is one from my collection that the auction house, which in this case was Stax, said it was the 30th anniversary of Alfred Nobel's death. I don't actually have any evidence to believe that's true, but let's look at the imagery on the back. It's kind of interesting. This guy's going after Hydra, and so it's Athena, and she's spearing the 3-headed serpent Hydra, and the Latin means science overcomes the evil of the body and the soul. It's pretty big metal. It's silver, and like I said, I don't know about that 30th year thing. It might have been for something else, and you'll see why I'm not so sure of that in the next medal. This one really is the 30th anniversary of Alfred Nobel's death, so I'm thinking the auction houses could have had that mixed up, and it's in 1926, which is 30 years after he died in 1896, and this is Prometheus on the back, and he's giving fire, which is sort of symbolic of civilization and knowledge and everything to humanity, which is a famous part of Prometheus mythology. And the IVA underneath the bust of Nobel it took me a while to figure that out. It's actually the Swedish abbreviation for the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences. That's not the same academy that gives out the prizes. This one's in bronze. Yesterday I found an auction record of one in silver. And I also found that Lindberg reused this reverse for other medals of this organization. So they did at least one other medal. They might have done others. I'm going to end the Nobel with just saying there's lots of other Nobel numismatics. This one's not actually by Lindberg. There are coins. I actually have a stamp with Nobel's on it, and so you could collect those. There are reproductions of the Peace Prize and the other prizes. I don't collect those. There also are even some coins, and there's a lot of medals commemorating Nobel Prize winners, and so there's a lot of ways you could go with this if you wanted, which I have not. So I want to talk about Lindberg's other medals. This one is sort of related in that it's from his company, the Nitroglycerin company, which is what that means in Swedish underneath the bust of these two guys. These two guys basically ran the company, the first guy for the first period, and then the second guy for the later period after Nobel died. And on the back, it's got this allegorical symbol of this guy, breaking some rocks apart, basically. I think it's kind of cool. But this kind of stuff, it's the reverses that I find most interesting about these about Lindberg's medals. This one actually, the obverse is more interesting, but it's the same kind of idea. This is for a fire insurance company, and I like it because it's Michael. It's the Archangel Michael, and he's slaying the fire-breathing dragon because it's a fire insurance company. And so it's rather interesting a representation of Archangel Michael. This one is for a soprano, pictured on the Christina Nilsson pictured on the obverse, and on the back is a young woman teaching a girl music. This one took me a while to figure out. It's the Neptune organization is what it translates to. It's a maritime charity, you know, and with, you know, life saving and that kind of activity. And this was the convoy. Actually, I think they translates to convoy, and I'm not sure exactly what event they're commemorating, but I think, you know, something on the water, obviously. This one is another insurance company. This guy ran this company, Svea, for a long time, and when he retired, they commissioned this medal from Lindbergh. There seems to be quite a few that he did that were, you know, honoring people who retired. Those nitroglycerin ones were the same kind of thing. I guess that was a Swedish kind of practice at the time. And this, you know, has, you know, this allegorical figure standing guard to protect your life against fire, I guess. And the Swedish around here, basically, which is written up here, is translated into English as fire and life insurance. AB Svea is the company name. Not all of his medals, of Lindbergh's medals, were round. This one, to a guy named Oscar Montelius, it turns out that he was a government antiquarian and archaeologist and invented some interesting things in archaeology. And this was one of his retirement after 50 years. I've been working for 38. Another 12 could be tough. But this one I think is kind of interesting. It has the allegorical figure with their torch shining light into a cave. So that seems kind of archaeological. And again, I think, you know, I like the artistry on the reverse. And so to wrap up, the Nobel Prize is the most prestigious prize in science and literature and for peace. And you might ask, why is there not a Nobel Prize for mathematics? And the legend is that Nobel's wife had an affair with a prominent mathematician. The problem with that is Nobel wasn't married, and there's actually no evidence for that story. It's widely repeated. I'd heard it a long time ago. The real reason is probably that he didn't think mathematics actually did much for humanity. He wanted to recognize those people that had made significant, rather material contributions to the human condition. And I guess he didn't consider mathematics, nor economics for that matter, worthy of such a prize. After the economics prize was created, the overall arching Nobel Committee voted to not expand it ever again. And so, like, there's nothing for the computations, where the big prize is called the Gordon Bell Prize, and for mathematics it's the Fields Medal. And they're different prizes, but prestigious nonetheless. And I think that it's fair to say that Lindbergh's portrait of Nobel is quite iconic, even if it isn't the one on the Peace Prize. You know, if you ask people, you know, if you showed people a bunch of pictures of medals and say which was the Nobel Prize, they're probably going to pick one of Lindbergh's portraits. Okay, this is a book I need to read, or I need two books I need to get. I'm going to try to get them from the A&A library if they have them. They're apparently a complete description of Lindbergh's catalog of Lindbergh's medals. They are in Swedish, which is going to be problematic, I think. They're not online, so I can't do Google Translate or anything. I did promise 2 degrees of separation from me and the Nobel Prize. Well, in 2021, the Nobel Physics Prize was awarded to 3 people. Half the prize was given to Suki Manabe and Klaus Hasselmann. Manabe was at GFDL. He was Japanese, came to the United States in the 50s and joined the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Lab, GFDL, in Princeton. And I do actually have sort of a connection there. I have colleagues that worked with Manabe, and a friend of mine had written some papers with Manabe. But my closer connection is to Klaus. And the prize is for the physical modeling of the Earth's climate, quantifying variability, and reliably predicting global warming. I might not have described it that way, but that's fine. What Klaus did is he pioneered what we call detection and attribution of the human influence on climate. Detection is finding some kind of change, and attribution is attributing that change to something. Maybe it's humans, maybe it's not. And this is what I do. And my friends Ben Santer and Gabi Hegel were postdocs at Klaus, and we've written numerous papers together. And I think it's fair to say, if Klaus hadn't dreamed up this idea of how to do this in the late 70s and early 80s, I probably would have had a very different career track. So that's as close as I'm going to get. So thanks very much, and we can do questions.
Thank you, Michael. Questions for Michael?
Yeah, I got a question or a comment.
Yeah, go
On
ahead.
your medal, it showed the 30th anniversary of Nobel's passing. You had the He-Man separating the rocks there, and looked very much like a Pan-Pac poster that I've seen, where the same He-Man is separating the channel in the canal. Kind of looks very similar. I couldn't put my finger on it though. I know I got an image of it.
I have that poster in my office, actually. A reproduction of it that the art museum was doing in 2015. It's the strong man separating the continents in that case. So yeah, the other thing about that image is it's similar period. I mean, a lot of Lindbergh's medals were in the 19 teens, 1912, 1915, some of these. That particular one's a little bit later. But he easily, like I said, they use that reverse on a bunch of medals, or at least two. And I don't remember the date on the other one, but he could have done that closer to 1915. So that style, I think, is similar to the style of the 1915.
It looks very similar. Is one maybe a motivation for the other? Or
it's a good question about who did that poster. I'll have to find that out.
That design is also on a commemorative medal from 1915, large bronze medal, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it comes in silver too.
I suppose I might have 2 degrees of separation myself. My departed wife, when she was 21, spent a year as a personal assistant to Jack Steinberg, who won the Nobel Prize in physics for high energy physics, and working with groups here in Santa Cruz and so forth. I learned that because we were watching a biography of Einstein, and it got to the end of his life, and he's with Niels Bohr and all these people, and she starts going, "Oh, I met him. And I finally said, "How in the hell did you meet all of them?" But Jack introduced me to all of them. I think he was Niels Bohr's graduate student.
That's funny. I have some other stories that are kind of like that. When I was just finished my PhD, I was at a conference on statistical physics, and it was a whole month long. And a lot of people weren't at the first one. That was at the University of New Mexico, and the second one was in Santa Fe. And at the first conference, there had been a talk about something called the joint probability momentum distribution. And these are commonly called Wigner functions after Eugene Wigner. And in the second conference, we were staying in the dormitories at the College of St. John, and Wigner was in the room across the hall from me in the dormitory. And so by this time, it was only like a 3-page paper, and I was 25 years old, and I had spent a lot of time trying to figure it out because I wanted to talk to him about it. And so I waited with the door open until he came home from dinner. And he came home, and I said, "Professor Wigner," somebody had asked him a question about this paper, and he hadn't read it. And so I said, "Professor Wigner, I have a copy of this paper. Would you like to discuss it?" And so we sat in his room, and I laid out the paper, and here I found myself explaining Wigner distributions to Professor Wigner. But unlike me, that took 2 or 3 days to figure it out, he had it down in about a minute and a half.
Yeah, I have I don't know if I would call it a more dignified experience, but I'm not sure. As you know, Berkeley has several prize winners in economics, in fact, and physics and whatever. By the way, these guys get a parking lot inside campus for life, which is probably a better price than the money they get from the committee, which is very rare, anyways. So when I took microeconomics, lo and behold, the professor was Dan McFadden, a Nobel Prize winner. And Dan McFadden model decision-making, not to get too technical, on yes or no situations. Do I ride BART or not? Do I, it's not you buy a little bit of this, or you don't buy a half a ticket to BART, you buy BART or you don't. So anyway, so that was a fairly new thing. Now it's a fairly common concept, and there's plenty of statistics to do that. But I was taking micro with Dan McFadden, and one day I go to the restroom and I sit to do what I have to do, and next to me there is a guy. I mean, I hate to be very, but there is just a pair of shoes, man, or a shoe, and so we time it perfectly, and we did our business, and we walk away. And lo and behold, there is Dan McFadden, my faculty, Nobel Prize winner. He was a Nobel Prize winner at the moment. And that's when it dawned on me that these guys, for as smart as they are, they're just like the rest of us. And so I told this to a fellow student. He goes, "Oh man, really? Wow." I say, "Yeah, they just do exactly like we do, man." And I actually joke. I say, I kind of lost a little bit of aura there for me, right? And he goes, "Oh no, you shouldn't." The guy was pissed at me at the fact that I have brought the guy down from a cloud down to planet Earth because we were sitting doing our business at the same time.
So he puts his pants on one leg at a time, but once his pants are on, he makes Nobel Prizes, right?
Right, exactly. And Dan McFadden actually used to joke that he's a Nobel Prize winner, but he actually took the money and he bought a small vineyard in Napa. And he says it's the most losing operation on planet Earth, but I'm happy. So,
Drinks up all the profits.
anyways, that was funny.
Michael, I mentioned this once before, but Erik Lindberg would have tutored under Leah Alborn. And before, I couldn't give you the dates, but she was appointed the royal printmaker in the 1840s, and she was the chief engraver of the Swedish Mint from 1854 to 1895. And he started engraving during that period for the Swedish Mint. And she also did all the coinage for both Norway and Sweden during that same period of time, until she passed away in 1895. And she did 7 medals for the United States. The only one I can remember off the top of my head was the one she did for the Columbian Exposition, which of course was a bust of Columbus. But she did 6 others that are incredibly rare. But he would have had to have worked under her in the Swedish process sometime in that 1870, 1890 timeframe, I would think.
It would be interesting to compare some of her works with his to
They're
see
They're very similar, actually. The problem I run into when I try to research is the same problem you have. Almost all the information about her is Swedish.
Yeah, and and if it's a PDF file, Google Translate doesn't work.
With it, yeah. Just a sidelight to it.
Some of these metals I can't find much about the metal itself. That archaeologist, for instance, I found it was mentioned in the numismatist, but it didn't give any real information. And there is a few things in Swedish, but I couldn't figure them out.
No, you can't interpret them on Google Interprets or anything like that. It's just.
I'll try to get a copy of these books from hopefully A&A Library and see if there's anything in it that I can figure out.
Then you got to find somebody that speaks Swedish.
Well, I can look at the pictures and probably read the numbers. And so.
Okay. Any other questions for Michael?
Great talk. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Very
Yes.
good. Very interesting, Michael.
Well, thank you.